I'm back. All right, so you guys have finished reading pages 17 through 20. You've been contrasting and comparing conservatism and liberalism, and you've made that T-chart looking at the economy, society, the role of government, and the individual. So that's good. Hopefully that's done. You're already set. So let's go ahead and look at the first slide. We're talking about liberalism in America today, and you can go ahead and read what it says up there. It's associated with the ideas of liberty and political equality. So hopefully you guys got that out of that in terms of like individual liberty and the role of the government. Okay. The other thing it does is it advocates for change in the social, political, and economic realms to better protect the well-being of individuals and to produce equality in society. Now, when we say equality, we're not talking about the equality of outcome. Usually we're talking about the equality of opportunity, that everyone gets a shot at the American dream, and that, you should have the ability to get there. That word equality becomes a really touchy subject depending on who you're talking to, and we're going to get into this in a little more detail when we get to a few other slides, because that changes depending upon how liberal or how conservative a government is. The idea of equality or even individual freedom. There's varying degrees of it depending upon the level of conservatism or liberalism. And then also, I think your book talks about classical liberalism versus modern liberalism. I really want you to focus more on the modern liberalism. So if you have to go back and look at that again, please do so, because we're looking at it in the context of today. We're not looking at it in the context of 240 years ago, because liberalism 240 years ago looks much different than it does today in 2019. So you should go back and look at that again if you need to. We're looking at the modern liberalism, not the classical. We're not looking at Jackson or Jefferson's idea of liberalism. We're looking at it today. All right, let's go ahead and look at the next slide, and that's conservatism. Okay, and one of the important aspects of conservatism is the importance of preserving tradition, the status quo, keeping things the same. Another one is order and stability. Usually this is represented in the fact that they want a stronger police force to maintain the laws, to maintain stability in society, and that's a good thing. The last thing is, if you're looking at this, is the emphasis on individual initiative, rule of law, limited government authority, and free market. Modern conservatism really focuses on the individual and giving you as much freedom to do what you want as possible without the government interfering in your life. That's the idea behind it. It gets a little nuanced because we have some changes in the idea of conservatism in the last 30 years since Reagan. It's changed in terms of how we view conservatism. So you've seen those, but let's get into a little more detail. And this is actually on page 17 in your book. And this does a good job of portraying liberalism on one side and conservatism on the other side. This is why I had you guys do a T-chart, liberals on the left, conservatives on the right. Because even if you're looking at this, the infographic shows you liberalism on the left. And this is important because we tend to say people are either left or right of the middle. And so if we're looking at the moderate as the middle, are you on the right? So are you a conservative or a Republican? Or are you a liberal on the left and a Democrat? That's how we tend to view things today. It's a very linear, straight line. You're on the right or you're on the left. That's it in American politics. When it actually is much more nuanced than that. So you can look at the infographic on page 17 if it helps you to finish off that T-chart that you guys are working on. Great. Keep looking at it if you need to go back and add some more stuff and make some additions and changes. And again, if you have questions, please let me know, because I know sometimes this can be a little bit confusing when we say, oh, conservatives like one thing, but then you hear in the news they're saying something completely different, because that is part of that modern conservatism that I'm talking about. All right, let's go and look at the next one. This is the classical political spectrum most Americans are used to seeing. So on the right, you have Republicans, conservatives, and on the left, you have Democrats, and they're liberal. We even have symbols for them. The elephants on the right, donkeys on the left. Democrats are blue. Republicans are red. We'll get into the nuance of the political parties more in detail. Like I said, when we get to political parties, that's a whole chapter in the book. We talks about the rise, the development, and the modern-day political party, and how it's even evolving today. So You can see that now. It's great. It's easy to understand. But it gets complicated, and we'll get to that in just a couple more minutes. So a couple of the other ideas we want to talk about are socialism, which you hear a lot. Like Bernie Sanders is supposed to be a socialist. And what Bernie Sanders really focuses on is like economic equality, like they're talking about on the slide. And I think even here, the book goes into some more detail saying that, theoretically that the government, takes over the means of production. So government interferes in business to make things more equal for people. Yes, and if we go to an extreme on that, socialism becomes communism. And we've seen that actually fail around the world. Communism. There are a lot of countries that are semi-socialist today. Even America is quasi-socialist. We have socialist things in our country right now. We have like Medicare. We have Social Security. So those are some socialist things that are happening in America today. But we generally don't talk about them because nowadays they're more focused on the more extreme versions of socialism. Okay. Then on the other one, we have libertarianism. This is a movement that really got going about 40 years ago in the United States. And it's more of an idea that government should take its hands off society altogether. That the least amount of government interference in our lives is the best. So that means, if you're a libertarian, that, the government doesn't regulate anything in your life. Pretty much it has a few roles in society, protecting our borders, protecting our country. And that's about it. Maybe making sure that, the country's running internally a little smoothly, but that's it. But they want very little government interference. The government will be really small in a libertarian society. Okay. So those are the other two. And this is where it gets complicated, because if we bring in those ideas, we start looking at a multi-dimensional. Instead of that left-right scale, red, blue, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, when we start talking about the three-dimensional model, we're looking at something like this here you see on the border. We have liberalism, we have conservatism, and then we have authoritarian and progressive. And you could even, on these axes, you can look at it as one is the government's role in the economy, and then the government's role in your life, the up, down, side to side. So it gets complicated. And this gives you an idea of how things can work if you have a conservative authoritarian government. You're looking at like the Nazi regime. If you have a liberal progressive government, you're looking at, I would say, England 40 years ago when it was super socialist, and you had free medical for everybody, and people, if you're unemployed, you can pretty much survive fairly easily in that society, and tons of free education, all sorts of stuff. So that's kind of that three-dimensional model, and it doesn't really match up with what most Americans are used to seeing because it doesn't fit into a really simple left-right, conservative, liberal argument. And then your book even has this, I think it's on page 20. It's another version of that same diagram that I just showed you. In fact, this is actually completely inverted. The axes are all wrong from the last one. But this is another modern political scientist trying to put it in perspective of that three-dimensional model of how we are. I hope that is somewhat informative. Again, if you have questions on this, you can ask Ms. Villegas to pause the video, write some questions down, and then I can answer them for you guys if you just message me. So this takes us to, I would say, our modern-day political spectrum. This is 2010. In the middle, you have an independent, and then, you have to the left progressives, Democrats, modern-day liberals, socialism, and then communism. And on the right side of that independent, you have a moderate, Republicans, conservatives, Tea Party, and then finally fascism, which is like a big nationalistic thing. If you studied world history, that's like Nazism on one side and communist Russia on the other during World War II. But those are the extremes. And again, most Americans, I would say, tend to be in this area right here because of our modern media and the push for viewership on Fox and MSNBC. Each one has taken a stance. So the Democrats are kind of right here on MSNBC, and the Republicans are kind of right here on Fox News. And they have their talking points, just like they have their talking points here. And it's become very polarized, even though most Americans are right here, which is funny because when people take tests, and you guys are going to be given access to an online test to take, a lot of you are going to end up in this range right here, along with most Americans. Let's look at the next slide. Okay, you're going to get this when we get to political parties, and this really breaks it down, and it breaks it down on a lot of different levels. But if you can see just up here at the top, we have right, left. Notice the colors. Left is blue, right is red. So conservatives, liberals, Democrats, Republicans. They're color-coded nowadays. Even if we watch the State of the Union address, you'll notice on that day a lot of Republicans wear red ties, a lot of Democrats wear blue ties. It's kind of childish, but it makes it easy for most Americans to spot, who's a Republican, who's a Democrat. I want to show you this graph just because the new AP test focuses a lot on graphs, a lot on data tables and charts. And the more you see these, and we'll talk about them when I get back to class, but you need to be able to identify big trends in these. Okay, the test questions they're going to ask you on the AP test are generally like one really open-ended, what's one big trend you see here? Identify it, describe it. Easy, point. Then they might get more nuanced and ask you why that trend occurs. And that's where you have to connect this to something else you learned in class. So usually I think these graph table chart questions are usually 3 or 4 parts, and usually getting more detailed the further down we get in the question. And I think that's all I have for the slides. So I'm going to go back, and if you have questions, again, like I said, you're more than welcome to email me, send me a message through Remind, and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions for you.